The very fact that the meme itself survives and thrives to this day points to perhaps a deeper kind of subconscious concern and evolution of the Bitcoin religion. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever and whenever this podcast finds you. Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to the Did You Know podcast. I'm Dustin, your host. Today, we're going to be talking about the Citadel meme within Bitcoin and why I think it's an important meme, but may have some negative implications on the direction of Bitcoin culture. Before we begin, please give the podcast a 5-star rating and written review on iTunes, and support the show by going to supportmypodcast.com. There you can find all the ways to support the show, like using the Amazon link this holiday season for shopping. And you could also, while you're there, take advantage of my listener-supported discounts, things like mushroom coffee, which blends coffee with lion's mane and chaga mushrooms, something that I take on a daily basis along with reishi as well. And these discounts are absolutely free, no cost or anything like that. These are just for you, my supporting listeners. So go to supportmypodcast.com and find the ways to support, and you can click on that listener discount support button and find all the discounts there. So, like I said, the topic today is going to be about an article, actually, that I wrote on the Citadel meme within Bitcoin, and I published this about a month or so ago. But I recently went back and I edited it and updated it after a little bit of criticism and conversations that I had about it. And you can find the article on my Medium page, which is on my website, or just in the blog section of my website at didyouknowcrypto.com. So I'm basically going to be reading this article, and as well as just kind of digressing a little bit to make a few more points that I didn't quite make in the article either, or that I didn't feel were quite conducive to the written word, but I think will be better in podcast form. So it starts off with the Bitcoin cult. An emerging religion is one that I have covered extensively in a variety of podcast episodes and blog articles, the links of which can be found right in the article, or if you go to the website and you click on Bitcoin religion in the tag section, or on YouTube as well if you're watching. If you go to my channel and you click on Bitcoin religion, you'll see all those videos that I've done in that as well. It's a most interesting development in the history of Bitcoin, and is what I would consider a predictable outgrowth of the Bitcoin organism, as was described by the German Bitcoiner Gigi in my episode with him. That would be episode 47. So religions are thought to be, by many evolutionary psychologists and historians, as a natural evolutionary step of culture or society wishing to kind of bind together its citizens and kind of cement these cultural norms that are viewed as positive and help for growth. So Bitcoin, while being very much a technology, is much more than that, and is revealing itself in multiple ways and adaptations as this organism searches for the most kind of efficient path to survival and solidify the gains of its supporters, who are required by the organism to both keep it alive as well as for it to thrive. So what is the Citadel? The Citadel first emerged as basically kind of a tongue-in-cheek, ironic post on Reddit. The link is going to be in this on the website for episode 63, as well as in YouTube. All the links to all the stuff that I'm talking about will be in there. But if you just want to Google it as well, you can just Google Reddit Bitcoin time traveler and you'll find the post. And this was a post where a supposed time traveler from the year 2025 had come back in time to 2013. This is when the post appeared, to warn Bitcoiners of what a Bitcoin future would look like. The future was a world where most world governments had ceased to exist due to lack of an ability to collect taxes as the world embraced Bitcoin. Early adopters were called earlies. They had become insanely rich, and those other people who were kind of at the top tier of society, along with the early Bitcoin adopters, were kind of the people of old fiat money wealth, that had a lot of US dollars or euros, who kind of converted early, and well, not as early as early Bitcoiners, but they converted before a full takeover of Bitcoin. And these people who had immense Bitcoin wealth were at extreme risk of violence, and they sought refuge in citadels. One of the examples of violence was the Winklevoss twins were apparently murdered, and as people were trying to take their money. And so they sought refuge in these citadels. These were protected walled cities where most work was automated. It was basically just where Bitcoiners were hanging out and safe from people without an immense Bitcoin wealth would be able to find them and be able to try to force money out of them. So also in this scenario, the North Korean and Saudi Arabian governments are the world's superpowers due to they had early large Bitcoin holdings, which is actually not completely untrue. North Korea is known to have done quite a few hacks and things that have accumulated them quite a bit of Bitcoin over time. And he claimed that he was also part of an underground group in the future that was trying to destroy the internet and computing technology. I think in general, it's kind of unclear if it was all computing, but he talked about smashing computers so that they could make Bitcoin irrelevant. And, he was basically asking Bitcoiners in 2013, stop this project now before it grows large and this terrible future comes to pass. So on the face of it, this is a pretty ridiculous post. Even if you just want to push the suspend belief button, kind of like what you do in movies and everything like that, and just assume for the sake of argument that it's true, if you could time travel to stop Bitcoin, why would you go to 2013 and post something on Reddit? You just go and track down Satoshi or, all the early known supporters who made it what it is and kill them. But, I digress. The post became popular, and the Citadel was kind of born out of this time traveler Reddit post, and kind of became embraced as a semi-ironic thing amongst Bitcoiners. And the embracement was ironic, but like many memes, the inherent irony in the meme can be stripped away over time and become basically kind of a semi-serious position or belief after a while. And what is telling of the Citadel meme is not that I think those who spread it or post memes about it or talk about can't wait for my Citadel or whatever now are that they're actually moving from irony to seriousness or anything like that, but that the very fact that the meme itself survives and thrives to this day points to perhaps a deeper kind of subconscious concern and evolution of the Bitcoin religion. So the Citadel concept is one of those effects of the Bitcoin religion or the Bitcoin organism, which I think they're one and the same. Its attempt to solidify the gains it's made and gather more adherents. In short, it's a belief in a future where society could possibly be stratified between early and late adopters of Bitcoin as the global reserve currency, given those who've gotten early and accumulated large quantities of Bitcoin, or late-stage adopters with available capital who are able to transfer wealth from fiat to Bitcoin, but at much higher prices, so that they have less Bitcoin than early adopters as far as for the buy-in. And this stratification would lead to resentment against early adopters who would hold vast quantities of wealth in the now highly valued, basically sole world currency. And the resentment would present a clear and present danger to those adopters, to anybody with a large amount of Bitcoin holdings. And this would require them to seek refuge from the threat of uprising or mere extortion and theft and kidnapping. And while individual states would provide them with a measure of security, the best way to keep basically, the barbarians at the gates would be to get together, to pool resources, to move in closely to one another for mutual support, for security, and kind of form these intentional communities, colloquially called citadels, to provide adequate security for Bitcoiners, as well as their families, and to protect their accumulated wealth. So within this Reddit post, as well as the surviving meme concept, there's no clear layout or location, and it ranges from a walled castle-like community to floating space stations above Earth, is the way I've seen it manifest itself. And what is interesting is that their philosophical correlation. Apologies, keep on pouring myself more water. I don't know why. I've just been extremely thirsty this afternoon. And the interesting thing is this correlation with 19th century American and European intentional kind of utopian, or I shouldn't say kind of utopian, they were utopian communities, as well as a science fiction series called The Culture, which was written by Ian Banks between 1987 and 2012. So I'm going to give a couple examples of these intentional communities, as well as kind of a little overview of The Culture science fiction series. So from 1790 to 1840 in Western Protestant Christianity, a phenomenon called the Second Great Awakening occurred, which resulted in radical offshoots of existing Christian denominations that believed tenets of faith should dictate the community's life and setting. One of the first ones we'll talk about is the Amana Colonies, which were in Iowa. They were established in 1856. And they created kind of this Christian communal life that survived for 76 years. It was totally self-sufficient and remained so basically until they shifted from what they'd created was basically from a regular community to a for-profit corporation during the Great Depression, which created the Amana Society Incorporated. But the best known brand that you'd be familiar with that they created was its refrigeration line, which created the first commercial upright freezer. And the community survives to this day, actually, still heavily agricultural based, but relies a lot on the Amana corporations. I'm sure you've heard of Amana refrigerators and other appliances, or relies on these corporate profits and tourism for their sustainability. And it's based on the Pietism movement within Lutheranism, which calls for communal living. It emphasizes and reinforces through social pressure the need to live a fully Christian life, and they would find sanctification through a heavy focus on lifestyle adherence. Like, it was very rigid lifestyles. Owenism was another example of this. Robert Owen, he was a businessman and a founder of the basically utopian socialism and cooperative movements. He embraced socialism and Christianity, or this embracement of both of these things led to his experimentation with intentional utopian communities. Socialism is very utopian, and that fits very well with kind of Christianity, because Christianity is very utopian, but for way different things than socialism is, because Christianity's utopian dreams are not of this world. As Christ told Pontius Pilate that his kingdom was not of this world. And Christians believe that the utopia that they seek is not on earth. On earth is for living a righteous life to achieve that utopian in the afterlife. Whereas socialism has got this concept of a utopia in the present day. So one can understand, even though they are they don't match up through any kind of rigorous theological thinking, but you could see how attractive it would be to try to match an idea of creating a utopian society in the material corporeal world in the time being before you would reach that utopian society in the kingdom of heaven. And he, experimented with these utopian communities in America and Britain. His most famous was called New Harmony in Indiana, and the belief was, as with all the other Christian intentional communities, that, or I should say, majority of them, that a lack of personal property would lead to destruction of greed, because members would focus on the good of the community, not on just getting whatever they needed for themselves. And their sanctification individually be leaning, would be found through focusing on not only the good as far as for making sure people have blankets and all that, but on the spiritual good and holding accountable for others, and being able to actually have time to do that versus spending all your time trying to work to achieve material ends. They leaned heavily on the same pietist religious beliefs that the Amana Colony did as well, as they were semi-Lutheran of an offshoot. A grand town had been envisioned that would be walled in. It would be a center for gathering of the commercial goods that the community produced, for religious instruction, for education, for all that kind of stuff that you can imagine that a community would need. And although the community attracted about 1,000 residents and lasted about 2 years, it was basically a total economic failure. Big surprise, right? Josiah Warren, a resident of the community, described it as being doomed to failure, given that the united interest of the group was at perpetual war with the individuality of its adherents. It was constantly having to battle against the individuality and the bucking of conformity of the people who lived there. He also attributed it to lack of individual sovereignty. In short, well, he didn't say it was specifically individual sovereignty. I should say that is my own words, but that it was his words of saying it was at war with the individuality of the adherents, to me, is being at war with the natural human yearning for individual sovereignty from the rule of other humans in this material world. And I think that he is spot on. I think that that's a lot of the problem with a lot of these socialistic utopian communities, is they're going to spend so much time trying to get people to not care about their own material good that a lot of times people lose focus on their want, or they lose focus, and they lose focus on the aims that they're trying to achieve, because they're constantly trying to police others' actions and make sure that they're doing what they're doing for the good of the community. It's not that this can't work. You do see this, you see in Mennonite, you see in Amish communities, but they also are able to accumulate profit into themselves. Also, if you actually look in Christian monastic movements, ascetics, like the Benedictines or the Carthusians, I mean, they are not accumulating individual wealth, and they are doing things for the good of the larger Christian community and all that kind of stuff. So it's not that it's impossible. I just think if you're looking at it as a way to take the average mom and pop and person on the street, this is just ridiculous utopian thinking. The last community of the Second Great Awakening that we'll talk about is the Bruderhof Communities. And this is another Christian utopian movement. And it started in 1920, and it's actually still going on today, albeit at much lower numbers. And they practiced a community of goods, communal ownership, and the same communal ownership of goods as was described in the first Christian communities in Acts 2 and 4. And the group considers themselves distinct in denomination, although others have called them Anabaptists, which is a faith history that the Amish, Mennonites, and Hutterites follow from. The community started in Germany, but most of the people of the Bruderhof left with the rise of the Nazi Party for fear of confiscation of their community's property and conscription. They were conscientious objectors. They did not want to fight in war. So from the German communities that left, they created communities in England, Paraguay, the United States, and Australia. With all those, except for the one in England, still surviving to this day, the community, as I already mentioned, holds all property and goods produced in common. All members are working for the community, and all monetary benefits that they get even at an individual level, are then used for the benefit of all. Members dress very plainly, and like their other Anabaptist brethren of the Amish and Hutterites, they basically reject most technology within the community, seeing anything that may interfere with personal sanctification as something to be avoided. So with the Bruderhofs, you do see, unlike the Owenism, you do see an ability for a communal property society to exist. I don't think that it is I think that's a way that you can make it a case where people go into monastic communities, and especially those who stick with it, are extremely dedicated to that lifestyle. The same way that intentional communal property communities can work if everybody is dedicated. Problem is, you're not going to find everybody in the whole world is going to be dedicated to that. So you're going to be spending more and more of your time becoming more brutal and brutal and brutal, trying to suppress people's natural instincts of individuality and accumulation of capital for their own benefit. So the last one I talked about was the Culture series, and this was a series of books by Ian Brooks. He was a Scottish author, and it's a utopian kind of post-scarcity space society, kind of like how Star Trek is in a way. And it consists of humanoids, aliens, and an advanced AI, and they live in what is considered a libertarian socialist society spread across the galaxy. The culture is created by humanoids and AI 9,000 years prior to the events in the first novel, which would put it at about 7669 BC. The members of the culture live on a spaceship and other non-planetary structures, as the founders did not want to live on planets because they wanted to avoid these centralized political power structures that continued in the series. The history taught them that they constantly occur within planet-based economies, so they decided to reject living on planets and move to non-planetary structures such as spaceships and things like that. And the series focuses on like a lot of the wars and political intrigue that occur between the culture and other advanced societies, as well as how they interact with lesser civilizations. But there's a sub-theme in there of individuals living in a post-scarcity society and how they are able to live where priority is no longer on acquisition of property, as since everything is already available, right? So it's interesting because then the focus of these people comes not on, well, I got to work more so I can get more money so I can buy the boat that I want, right? Whatever you want, you can get. So at that point, material objects have no value. But the focus on this in this sub-theme is how these people are struggling to find meaning without personal acquisition and accumulation of capital, a kind of a central pursuit of their lives. So how does this manifest? So I titled this section of the article, The Manifestation and History of Citadel Impulses. Many Bitcoiners, especially the early ones, were libertarian, or at least had some sort of libertarian leanings, and were often kind of steeped in that kind of libertarianish culture, the literature and philosophy of it. A famous, this is pre-Citadel impulse that would have, influenced the minds of a lot of early Bitcoiners, as well as those who are Bitcoiners today, is this concept of Galt's Gulch, which comes from Ayn Rand's famous novel Atlas Shrugged. And for those people who have not read the book, brief synopsis, I'm not doing it justice enough, is that government overreach and obsession with equality had led to laws that continually punished entrepreneurs and businessmen for, innovation and the success that they achieved through innovating and creating, more successful businesses. And their punishment of people like this led to a lot of these entrepreneurs, a lot of these business people to start disappearing. And these men sought to escape a society and culture that exploits them and basically they went on strike by removing themselves and forming a community that they called Gulch, where, quote unquote, men of mind reside. Another example of a very similar line of thinking is the failed laissez-faire city that I discussed with the cypherpunk Paul Rosenberg in episode 31 of my podcast. These men who were trying to create laissez-faire city, they were directly inspired by the philosophy of Ayn Rand and the concept of Galt's Gulch. So Galt's Gulch inspired laissez-faire city, and that they weren't just happened to be existing at the same time. And they first attempted to lease basically a large area or a large lease in a Latin American country to create this kind of actual physical real world Galt's Gulch. And initially they secured promises from the existing government there for a long-term lease, but that actually ended up falling apart. And they decided, instead of wasting the talent and the capital and the people that they'd assembled for this, they decided to create a digital version of it. They called it Laissez-Faire City. This was in the early days of the internet. And this was to be a place where a digital community that valued truly free markets and privacy could reside. And ultimately, due to disagreements and infighting, the project did disband. But a lot of stuff was launched, and a lot of really neat things like encrypted email and all that kind of stuff was created within this city. Or I should say that we're this digital culture of laissez-faire city. And Bitcoin Topia was also very interesting. And this is a comment. This was a concept by Morgan Raccoons, who had created this idea of Bitcoin Topia, where he was selling undeveloped land in Elko County, Nevada, for 0.5 Bitcoins per acre. And the idea was to create kind of a libertarian style society where only cryptocurrency was used, and where a Gulch style brain drain from the disparate global community of Bitcoiners could actually congregate and live physically, and kind of in a somewhat circular, self-sustaining Bitcoin economy. It turned out, actually, though, that he actually owned very little of the land that he was attempting to sell, and he was arrested and is actually now incarcerated, serving jail time. Likely, probably more because he was trying to sell land that was actually federal protected land. And the point of the story is not about Morgan or his dishonesty, but about this impulse, the impulse itself to self-segregate. And this impulse is only found in those who have a religious zeal around their ideology. Randian libertarians, the people that talked about in Laissez-Faire City, embrace this. And those who fully embrace the Bitcoin meme are actually starting to exhibit these same impulses themselves, because it is turning into a religious zeal, or it already has. It's just some people are just barely starting to recognize that this is what it is, and some still fight it. So the correlations with the Citadel meme and all this is, well, first, Giacomo Zucco, he is a prominent Bitcoiner, and he kind of, I wouldn't say he took offense. He wasn't angry or bothered, but he took exception, I guess, at the concept of the Citadel, that the Citadel meme is purely about its security concerns and protection in a future Bitcoin society. His position, which actually I do agree with, but I actually did not properly illustrate it enough in the first draft of this article, is that, it was very, like I said, the time traveler meme was ironic. People talking about the Citadel meme then and a lot now are still being ironic. But this semi-ironic embracement of the Citadel meme is, his contention is that it's not really about security, it's actually about culture. And, the examples of the religious communities that I outline above are, these cultural self-segregations, and they're about the cultural segregation, not as much about security. Surely one reason would be individuals who embrace a similar culture or religious idea is to congregate. and for, kind of a mutual security. But I think the more important thing is the cultural aspect. Oops, I had a little mistake there. Sorry about that. The monastic movement in Christendom as well was an attempt by those who saw corruption rampant in their society and culture and wished to separate themselves from that corruption so they could live a life that was directed towards righteousness and virtue. The original monastic movement was basically not congregations and groups, but actually individuals who sought refuge from sin and a sinful and corrupted world on their own. And some of the earliest ones were called the Desert Fathers. They were hermits and ascetics who lived very, very simple lives and very sparse lives inside caves in Egypt. Later on, this movement started to form, and in some cases, communities were not only religious people, but also families that lived within these intentional communities that centered around, most often around a church. A modern Christian movement, though, that we're seeing in the modern days called the Benedict option. And this is actually one where increasingly Christians in the United States and in Europe, they no longer identify with modern Western culture, and they not only see the values of the society shifting away from them. So it's not only that, well, they're just not agreeing with us anymore, but that society and culture is becoming increasingly openly hostile towards their own beliefs. So intentional communities are springing up in the United States for these reasons. So St. Mary's is located in Kansas by Catholics, a group of Catholics who reject the Vatican II reforms. They're called the Society of oh goodness, now I forget, St. Pius XII, SSPX. And they wish to live outside of the modern culture. So, bring it back to Bitcoin, Bitcoiners have inherited this libertarian Western tradition of self-segregation. And that has obviously influenced our creation or the creation of Bitcoin and the culture that we are creating around it. And the Citadel meme, I'm not saying it's like, well, this is going to be it, but what it is an early one, but albeit ironic expression of these traditions, of these impulses within the culture that we already exist and grow up in, for the most part of you people viewing and listening. So those who hold large amounts of Bitcoin are also inherently invested in the continuation of what would then, in this Bitcoinization future, it would be then the status quo. By being a Bitcoiner, you are incentivized to ensure the survival of Bitcoin, and thus you are then, even though your interest in Bitcoin survival, sorry, the water pump just kicked on, your interest in Bitcoin survival is purely selfish. But even within that selfish act, you are helping to survive and concerned with the survival of every other Bitcoiner's wealth and status in society. So the same incentives that Bitcoiners have to ensure the survival of the Bitcoin organism, the Bitcoin religion, is to maintain their status. Or I should say, the same incentives to ensure the survival of the organism to maintain the status of Bitcoiners is the same incentives that modern Western states use to ensure segments of society have basically a vested interest in the continuation of the status quo of the state's survival. Early American history, we saw a system of what they would call internal improvements. This was actually a really big thing with the Whig Party. And it offered really terrible corruption-laden schemes that would be paid to wealthy individuals to build roads, canals, bridges, things like that. It was widely known in the party and part of the plan. It's widely known in the Whig Party, I should say. And it was actually part of the plan itself for these individuals to overcharge the government as they would become more reliant on government contracts as well as create leverage for blackmailing opportunities based on corruption of government officials. Modern Western states have also now, instead of just trying to bind the rich to them and their incentives to it, because you have to remember in those early days, it was basically land-holding white men were the only ones who could vote. So now that is no longer the purview of the more well-off. They found a way to get the bottom as well. So these incentives, such as welfare and all that, to maintain the status quo of power distribution across the entire meat space network. As they become just as resilient, the individuals become just as resilient on the benevolence of the state, as the rich were on it for its survival through basically corrupt government contracts. So as you can see, the modern Western states would use entitlements to get the poor invested for their survival on the status quo, and the older kind of versions of this was the to basically use corruption and kickbacks to bind the rich to maintaining the status quo of the state, for kind of a complete picture of their survival now, as we see both of those working together. And this kind of falls, to tie it back into Bitcoin, is that this is, an interesting thing, and it's rooted, excuse me, in the block size debate that split the community in the fall of 2017 when Bitcoin Cash was created. And if you actually want a little bit more history on the background of this, I've conducted some interviews explaining the split, which you can listen to here in episode 9 and 14. And links, once again, will be in the show notes at didyouknowcrypto.com/EP64 or down in the description of the episode at YouTube. So I'm not going to go deep into it in this podcast or this video. But in short, those who thought the trade-offs for increased block size to facilitate cheap transactions on the main Bitcoin chain went to BCH, or Bitcoin Cash, and those who thought that the trade-offs were too dangerous or risky and valued on-chain Bitcoin transactions as a store of value, the digital gold thesis, remained in Bitcoin BTC. Citadel Bitcoiners are exclusively in Bitcoin BTC. I've never seen anybody outside of Bitcoin within either Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin Satoshi's Vision or Tron or Ethereum or whatever ever mention anything like a Citadel sort of meme. And as in the example that I mentioned just before, the binding of high net worth and politically connected individuals with increasing wealth via holding Bitcoin, they're able to protect themselves from rabble rousing in that camp or wherever they are. I do not, however, or what I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you look at the way that that modern Western states have done it, where, like I said, where they've bound the poor through welfare assistance, and they've bound the rich through subsidies and corruption through government contracts and things like that for the canals and all that back in the day, and one can see cases of that in the modern day as well. I do see that within Bitcoin, in the Citadel meme, I see a clear case for binding the high net individuals and people who hold a lot of BTC into wanting to maintain the status quo of a Bitcoin present, if the Citadel meme plays out as it has been alluded to. I do not, however, see a similar well-articulated plan for those people who are in lower socioeconomic status, or SES, as the state does bind them to the status quo through welfare. So currently in Bitcoin, the concept of second layer Lightning Network, sidechains, all this kind of good stuff, is their answer for Bitcoin daily use, which I agree with, but it is not assured of success. And even the most zealous defenders of the second layer agree that Lightning does have obstacles to overcome and is not as desirable as the Bitcoin network in terms of security. There are trade-offs for all that. In a scenario where its success is as hoped and Citadel Bitcoiners offer no explanation for average people being bound to it as intrinsically high as those with high net worth, it's not as the binding is not as deep there for people on the lower end of the spectrum as people higher end of the spectrum to maintain somewhat of a status quo. The only thing that I've seen is that they'll say, well, the poor will have the great gift of having their net worth a lot smaller, mind you, having qualities that the fiat system could not deliver, and in fact leech off of them. So they're basically saying that Bitcoin is offering them a great gift, and they should be very happy with it, and they should they'll come to appreciate it. I don't disagree with this statement, but I don't disagree that it's a great gift to anybody, no matter your economic status. But I don't believe they will have the same ethical and philosophical buy-in, and definitely not to the same degree, definitely, that we do, if they would be willing to put aside their preference for status quo security and for the status quo security that we have, and understand the mechanics of Bitcoin and economics better already. We would already live in a world of Bitcoin. If they were willing to set aside these sorts of things and really delve into it, we would already have that world. The fact that we do not already tells me that even in a Bitcoin world, they won't necessarily appreciate or love a Bitcoin as much as we do, especially within this concept of the Citadel meme. And this, to me, represents an attack vector in Bitcoin as far as the Citadel meme is concerned. If that kind of this hyper-Bitcoinization future results in something approaching this, one where individuals with high amounts of wealth, in that scenario, this attack vector, it means that people with this wealth and the security and high walls, they still won't be able to stop it if it comes to a boiling point. When the masses are jealous and angry, they are ripe for persuasion from those who they want to twist their sense of right and wrong into a concept of, fairness, justice, and equality, and egalitarianism, and all that kind of good stuff. And those who have more obviously, that those who, they will use and twist this to basically say that those who have more obviously acquired it by unjust means, and this gives the violent taking of said wealth at best fair, and at worst a moral requirement, right? It is a moral duty for us to balance the scales. We see this already. We see this already right now. It's an appealing appeal that you see within the left, and especially within the concept of democratic socialism that has been gaining in popularity over recent decades. It very well could be that in a Citadel future Bitcoiner world, the masses are content with sound money, and while they would still be lustful for life, for the life that those who have more, i.e. the early adopters, and this always is throughout history, I highly doubt that would actually be the case, that they'd say, well, I think it's totally fine for someone to have more than me, but I'd like a little bit more, but that's fine. In my personal opinion, frankly, I think the Citadel meme is a shit one. And I think it's really rife with elitist overtones and doesn't play well outside of a small group that feels entitled to reap the benefits and live a pleasurable life due to either they had very early foresight into what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin would be, or they just got lucky. I think a lot more people who bought a bunch of Bitcoin back in the day are really just more lucky than have a lot than the amount of foresight that they like to attribute to themselves. But, without knowing each person's individual situation, it's very difficult to tell. But I really do think there's quite a few people who go, well, I bought Bitcoin in 2011. Obviously, how smart am I? Where in all, they probably had made a bunch of bad financial decisions before. They just got lucky with this one. So that's not to impugn anybody who did. I'm not calling out any specific person, but it's just the amount of people who claim to have had foresight statistically. I just don't buy it. And I understand, like I said, that the Citadel meme is an ironic one, and it was adopted semi-ironically. But as I mentioned as well, I think the fact that it survives, that it is popular, that it continues to pop up and kind of stay within kind of the collective subconscious of Bitcoiners means that it is no longer just purely ironic and just haha funny and jokey. Now, to go back to this concept of early Bitcoiners wanting or being attracted to this because this future would offer them the pleasures of reaping the benefits of this immense wealth that they would have had. I think that they are actually entitled to reap the benefits, to live a pleasurable life. And I agree that they should be able to do that if that scenario plays out. They took risks, whether it was financial or reputational or in lifestyle comfort, by deciding to put more money into buying more Bitcoin or dedicating themselves to Bitcoin than focusing on other things. And they did this for a period of their life, whether it was 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, or 6 or 7, or going on almost 10 now, for some of those really, really early people. But this rolls right into kind of what the masses and a lot of what the leftist rhetoric is this concept of what is fair in life. And while those who create value should be free to enjoy the wealth it creates, we can't ignore the repercussions in the real world and how people react to them, and how people would react that a very small group of people would have a vast majority of wealth in this new financial system, while the other people who are just playing catch up are just buying small paltry pieces of it. There is a reason major corporations will, donate, as far as for Bitcoiners, what they need to think about is, why do major corporations donate to both candidates when it's clear that one or both of them represent interests and policies that are directly opposed to their own? It's because of survival. They don't, they will donate, 70% to Obama and only 30% of their total donations to McCain, because they think Obama's a better horse in the race, which is what happened in the 2008 election. But it does not mean that they're not hedging their bets and going, I'm willing to spend some of my wealth to secure a better future for myself. And it fits in too with a libertarian, individualistic sovereignty kind of mindset as well, is that if we, when we talk about not wanting state use of charity, we don't talk about that we don't want to have charity at all, but that it should be privately done. And I don't see a lot of thought into this. I think, I don't have the answers to how Bitcoiners in the Citadel meme could deal with this attack vector, but if the scenario that they're semi-ironically but kind of semi-seriously saying they want comes to fruition, and a deeply meditative and articulating thought process has not occurred as to how to appeal and bind those late adopters to Bitcoin with more than, well, you'll just have sound money, be happy. Because people don't care about sound money. If we don't do that, I think the existence of not only the Citadel, but Bitcoin is in jeopardy in the long run. If history is to be any judge, humanity is more than willing to destroy a great good with using, or they're willing to destroy a great good using a justification of eliminating a minor, albeit only perceived, wrong, right? They will destroy something great just because they perceive something to be wrong that they think negatively affects their life. So, to me, Bitcoiners really need to give a really thoughtful and really deep, long discussion and thoughts, and creating kind of as much time as is spent on how great it's going to be in the future when we're all really, really rich. They need to do 10 times that amount to go, how can we actually appeal to people who are going to be jealous of everybody who was able to get in early? And while we can attribute a lot of us getting in early to foresight, or going, well, I wasn't lucky, I just understood it. I studied economics. I was in these circles, right? But a lot of people are on different journeys in their life. You were not born a libertarian or a Bitcoiner. It took a journey, and there's probably periods of your life before then where if you'd been exposed to Bitcoin, you would have thought, just as a lot of other people think now, that you would have had negative thoughts on it. You would have not gotten involved in it. And then later you would have been jealous of people who did. If there were different paths that you would have taken in your life, it would have taken you longer or never to get to the point where you could understand and accept Bitcoin. And I think that we need to give a lot more thought into how to secure Bitcoin against those who may become jealous of the wealth that has become accumulated early on by those who will come much later. So I want to thank you guys for listening. And if you have any criticisms or comments, please feel free to comment on the YouTube video or go on Facebook or Twitter and find the episode link that I'll have there. And feel free to ask me questions or say why you disagree with me. I really like hearing from you guys. Feel free to DM me at any time and suggest shows or suggest guests, or just discuss things. I really, really do appreciate it. Before you go, if you could go to iTunes once again, leave a 5-star and a written review. That really helps. Go to supportmypodcast.com to support us in many ways, and all the other ways that I do have available, such as Amazon or just direct donations, donating Bitcoin and all that kind of stuff. I take all different types of cryptocurrencies, because you can donate Ripple if you want. I'll just convert it to Bitcoin, but I don't mind taking Ripple. If you go to digiknowcrypto.com, that'll be about 3/4 of the way down on the page as well. But mostly, I want to say thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. Have a great night, and take care. We'll see you at the next episode.